Have you heard about LLCs being broken before in the event of a lawsuit? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about how to set up your limited liability company for the maximum protection. All right, let's get started. Okay, so when it comes to setting up limited liability companies, here's the thing. You can set it up, but if it doesn't protect you in the event of a lawsuit, then what was the purpose of going through that exercise? And history is littered with investors who have made mistakes in setting up their limited liability companies because they just don't get the right information, or they talk to someone that seems to be an expert, but that person's not an attorney and does not understand what is required in order to ensure that your LLC is going to stand up to an aggressive creditor. And what really brought this to the forefront for me was a comment on one of my videos, my YouTube videos, where an individual investor commented that, hey, I set up an LLC and it did not protect me in the event of a lawsuit. That a creditor came in, they garnished all my accounts that were held in the LLC, took all the assets out. I didn't even get notified. And the next thing I know, my businesses are essentially bankrupt. Now, he wondered, how did this happen? Well, when I looked at his situation, it was pretty obvious what he did wrong. And I'm going to show you now what you should be doing to make sure that your LLCs are going to provide you the maximum amount of protection, because the purpose for setting these things up is to ensure that we don't lose our assets in the event we get sued individually, or that if the assets themselves create the liability, that we're not on the hook for it. Okay, so how do we go about creating the structure to create the maximum asset protection? So the first thing we want to look at is liability, right? Where does a liability come from? I already hinted at this, that you have two forms of liability. You have liability that comes from, I'll call it asset liability. Okay, so that means the asset itself is what's going to cause the harm for you. So if you had a rental property and you have this in your own name, right, and somebody's injured on the property, or maybe it's not an injury. Maybe it's just a tenant that wants to sue you because they stated, well, you discriminated against me when I was applying to rent this property. So I guess that's not even a tenant. You never even rented to them, but they're alleging discrimination. So they sue you. And now you're having to defend this. And guess what? Your insurance isn't going to cover you on that one. So for those of you that think insurance is your answer to lawsuits, think again, because we've seen numerous situations where insurance does not pay. And that just comes down to the fact that insurers try to exclude everything they can from their coverage. So you get sued personally because you're the one owning the asset. So this is what I mean by asset liability. It's creating the harm that drags you into the lawsuit. The other type of liability is what is called personal liability. And that is where you yourself are being sued. So let's say you're involved in a car accident and this person's hurt over here. And so then now they're suing you, okay, for the damages they sustained in that car accident where they are asserting that, you're on your cell phone, you weren't paying attention when you're driving. So in that scenario, you get a judgment against you personally, then your assets that are in your name are now at risk. So with our structures, what we want to do is we want to make sure that asset liability does not come and affect us personally, and at the same time, we want to ensure that the personal liability does not come over here and affect our assets. So what does that type of planning look like? Well, it involves a two-tier approach to planning. So what we like to do when we're creating these types of structures is we're going to set up a asset liability entity. This is the entity that's going to hold the asset right here. So let's say that this property that I own is in Oklahoma. I would create an Oklahoma LLC that's going to own the property, the rental property. So it's going to go into that limited liability company right there. Now, when I'm setting up this limited liability company, okay, the one thing you want to do before you file this, though, is you want to set up a holding company. This is called a Holding LLC. Okay, this is in Wyoming. So we want to set up a Wyoming Holding LLC. And you're wondering, well, why am I setting up a Holding LLC in Wyoming? It's going to become evidently clear to you in just a moment. Okay, so the reason we're setting up this overall structure is that I want a structure that protects me from asset liability, protects me from personal liability, and at the same time, I want anonymity. Because your friend in a lawsuit is Anonymity for your structuring so the attorneys, the tenants do not know what you own. The biggest mistake that I see people make with their planning is owning too much in their own name, or too many assets, or too many businesses are traceable back to them. Because when you can trace these assets back to the owner, and it's really simple to do this. If you have access to a county recorder's database, you can get on there, you can search property titles to see who owns the property, or you can go to a website such as opencorporates.com, type in someone's name and say, is this a person, an officer in any entities, or manager of an LLC? And it's going to show up. Or you can just search a business entity. And if you're associated with that entity, your name's going to pop up there. So it's very simple for creditors or attorneys to find out who's behind entities or who is behind ownerships of real estate when people don't structure their affairs properly. My partner, Toby Mathis, whom I started this firm with back in 99, he coined a term: you can't sue what you can't see. And that's what we like to do when we're setting up our structures. We want to make sure that people cannot see us. So going back to this, the first thing you do is you set up this Wyoming Limited Liability Company. That's the first entity you're going to create. Now, why am I creating this entity? Well, going towards the topic of this video, how do I create the best asset protection structure for my investment real estate? This entity here gives us anonymity. Okay, so what do I mean by that? That when you set up a Wyoming LLC, Wyoming does not collect any information on its members or managers. Okay, it doesn't ask for this. All Wyoming wants to know: name of the LLC, the address for the LLC, business address, and the registered agent, and the name of the person who is the incorporator that set this up. So as long as you're not using your home address, your personal address, okay, as long as you're not the one signing the form to set this entity up, and you're not your registered agent, then you've got nothing to worry about, okay, because your name, your personal information will not appear anywhere on this entity. So you set up your Wyoming LLC, you set it up where you're the manager here, and you're the member down here, and all of that is hidden from the public record because Wyoming's not collecting this. Now, the other thing about this entity, you want to make sure you're using a virtual business address. So we set up thousands of these entities every year, and one of the things that we provide our clients is a virtual business address for their entity. So their personal address or a business address associated with them is not used on the entity that can then be traced back to them. So we give them an address that traces back essentially to us, to our office, so it provides that level of anonymity that they're seeking, okay? Because there's ways in which you can look around this stuff if you don't make sure that you're closing off all the potential avenues that come back to you. So anonymity is important. That's why we're setting this up. But there's another reason why we're setting this up: asset protection, okay? So when we think about asset protection, okay, this LLC up here provides us asset liability, okay, protection from the asset itself. But remember the personal liability that I talked about where you get sued? Well, we want to make sure that our creditors cannot take our LLCs from us, because if they take the LLC from us, they're essentially taking the property. And people are shocked to learn that many states allow your personal creditor to control your LLC or take your LLC from you and to satisfy a personal judgment. And so what we need to do as investors is be extra hyper vigilant in ensuring that we're not owning an interest in an LLC that a judge could give to my personal creditor. I want to make sure I'm using an LLC or setting up an LLC that I own an interest in that has a statute that reads: the charging order is the sole and exclusive remedy, or the only remedy available to a creditor. And the reason, what does that mean? It means this: that a creditor cannot take your LLC, that the court cannot award them your limited liability company. So your LLC will always be there. You're always going to be in control of it, and you'll be managing it, and a creditor can't step into your shoes and gain control over the structure. That is critical, and is a mistake that is oftentimes made by people when they're creating their structures because they do not understand how important this is in the state statute. Wyoming, Nevada, and Delaware are the three top states when it comes to asset protection that offer this type of planning. And that's why I suggest you create a Wyoming LLC as your base entity, because I want to ensure that if I get sued, they can't touch my Wyoming LLC. Because if they can't touch my Wyoming LLC, then they definitely won't be able to get to my Oklahoma LLC because I don't own it. The Wyoming LLC is the member of that Oklahoma LLC. So everything my Wyoming LLC in turn holds on to or owns is now protected from my personal creditors. So that's how we build out these bulletproof plans. And it's so simple to implement and it's so simple to manage. And it surprises me when I look at investors for the first time and I'm reviewing their structures and I'll see LLCs all over the place and their names associated with them and their personal addresses, worst of all, on them. And then they wonder why somebody's serving them at home for a lawsuit when they have a dinner party going on and they're really disgruntled because now all their friends think they've done stuff wrong because they just got served with papers. You don't have to go through that trauma if you set it up right. You can keep your creditors at bay. And we've had several clients, through the course of our career that have been involved in lawsuits. And when I say lawsuits, I'm not talking about $100,000. I'm talking $15 million, $20 million, $7 million. Those are serious claims that are being brought against them. And we've seen how these types of structures have protected them. So I know it works because it's tested. So you set this structure up. This is the first entity you create. Now, we've got our base down. Then when it comes to creating the LLCs that are going to own the actual real estate itself, the Oklahoma LLC, here's where the magic comes in. So when I set up my Oklahoma LLC, this is going to be the second entity I'm going to set up. When I set up this entity, when I file it with Oklahoma, I'm going to create this entity. This is really important here. This is going to be a member managed, LLC. Now, why is this so important? Because there's two types of LLCs you can form, manager managed or member managed. Probably 70% of the people that I speak to and I meet at my events that I talk to about these types of structures that have already created LLCs with their local attorney, CP, or they just did it on their own through LegalDoom, or I think it's called Zoom, can't tell me what type of LLC they have. And I ask them, what type of LLC did you create? Who can member manage or manager manage? And they said, I think it's member managed. You think or you know? Because no one explains this to them. So the difference between setting up a member managed versus a manager managed LLC is the information that is collected by the state. So if I set up a manager managed LLC in Oklahoma and I made you the manager of it, then your name's going to be listed on that LLC. So if we set up this LLC and we called it Blessings LLC, then if Clint was the manager on the actual filing, then my name will be listed and my home address on that limited liability company. Now, I don't want that because I said anonymity is your friend. Can't sue what you can't see. So the way we're able to create this anonymity shield over your assets to keep you protected is that when we set up the Oklahoma LLC, rather than make it manager managed, we're going to make it member managed. So we're going to go with a member managed LLC like I told you here, and guess who the member is going to be? It's going to be our Wyoming Holding LLC. So if this one is Fuzzy Bunny LLC that we've set up in Wyoming, when I file for that Oklahoma LLC and I put on the filing that it's member managed, Oklahoma wants to know who is the member, I say Fuzzy Bunny. Well, who's Fuzzy Bunny? Well, it's a Wyoming LLC and here's the business address in Wyoming for it. So your information stays completely private. So you set up this Oklahoma LLC, you make the Wyoming Limited Liability Company its sole member, right? So you could be married, you and your spouse are down here. You own Fuzzy Bunny together, you're the managers of it, but Fuzzy Bunny owns Blessings LLC. It owns it 100%. So Fuzzy Bunny is providing anonymity, and it's providing that anonymity shield that I talked about earlier. So you set that up. Now, here's where you also need to make sure you're doing everything right with your LLC, because this is what happened in the YouTube comment that I made about the individual said his LLCs didn't protect him. Now, he didn't have a Fuzzy Bunny in his plan. And that's not the reason why his plan failed. The reason his plan failed is that when he set up his LLC right up here, say Blessings LLC, he did not obtain an EIN number. So one of the things you need to do here is you need to get an EIN number for every LLC. So this one also has an EIN number. You see, when the creditor, his personal creditor, obtained a judgment against them, all that creditor needed to do was take that judgment and file a writ of garnishment with various banks. And the writ of garnishment states, hey, if you've got a bank account under this person's name tied to this social security number, we have a judgment against them. Give us all the money up to amount we're owed. And so that's what they did. They sent the judgment in. They found that the judgment, or that he had set up LLCs, he didn't get an EIN. He used his social security number on the bank account. His name was listed there as the signer, but because his social security number was on there, they pulled the funds and they gave it to the creditor. Such a easy remedied mistake that was made, right? All you had to do was get an EIN, and that solves that problem. So when you set up these, you want to make sure you get an EIN. You also need to make sure that you draft operating agreements for your entities. A lot of people, when they're setting up LLCs, are under the impression that that operating agreement, it's just some paper, it's not that important. Oh, it is, right? You need an operating agreement. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is in the event of an audit, the IRS would definitely ask for it. Number two, if you're sued, they're going to want to see that you have an operating agreement for your LLC to see how it's structured, how it's managed, and what provisions are inside there with regards to how you distribute money and control that company. If you don't have that, then the attorneys on the other side will be then pushing to dissolve that company. So you've got to make sure that you have an operating agreement for your LLC. So those are some key aspects of setting up this structure. So your income's generated here from your rents, it passes down to your holding company, and then you take it out of the holding company. And oh, by the way, with this structure, if you're looking at it right now and you're wondering, well, how many of those blue boxes do I need? You only need one for this type of planning. You know, in my personal planning, I have a structure. I have my fuzzy bunny right here, and my fuzzy bunny owns multiple red boxes. All these red boxes flow down into this fuzzy bunny because they're all doing the same thing. They're all owning investment real estate. And so my wife and I are down here owning fuzzy bunny, and this protects all of these LLCs. And here's a great part about this. You know, when I am in an event and I draw something like this up on the screen, and I randomly ask people, I pick them out of the crowd, I say, hey, this is you right here. How many LLCs do you own? Well, you're thinking about that right now, and you're looking at this, and you could answer me on how many LLCs that you own. If you answered 5, you're wrong, okay? I know you think you own 5. No, you don't own 5 LLCs. You control 5 LLCs, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You actually only own one limited liability company, the Wyoming LLC. That's it. Your Wyoming LLC owns 4. So if you're ever involved in a lawsuit and somebody asks you, Clint, how many LLCs do you own? I own 1. Who do you think a creditor would be most interested in? The individual that owns 5 LLCs or the individual that owns 1? Right, it's going to be the guy that has 5. So be careful on how you answer those questions. That's why it's great to work with advisors who've been down the road before with other clients like we have here at Anderson. And that's why if you're thinking about putting some planning together, this needs to be done at the outset to get this type of protection. I mean, you can come and bring a Wyoming LLC in later to the party if you have existing LLCs, but it's not as clean as setting it up sooner rather than later. And if you'd like to learn how to do that, be sure to set up a strategy session with us and we can help design out a plan for you. Take care.